There are mornings when you look in the mirror and the woman staring back seems unfamiliar. Her eyes hold yours, questioning, who is she, this stranger wearing your face? And who, my dear, are you beneath the roles you've played for so long? Sometimes, in the quiet moments between midnight and dawn, you might wonder when exactly it happened, this gentle separation from yourself. This feeling of becoming a visitor in your own life. It wasn't sudden, was it? No earthquake or storm. Just the slow drift of continents inside your heart, moving imperceptibly until one day, you realized an ocean had formed between who you are and who you've become. I remember the first time I felt it, that strange disconnect, like watching myself from somewhere just beyond my shoulder. I was performing all the familiar routines, making coffee with the same measured movements, answering questions with practiced smiles, moving through doorways my body knew by heart. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice whispered, "Who is this woman going through the motions? And where did you go? You know this feeling too, don't you?" That moment when your hands are doing dishes or folding laundry, and suddenly you wonder whose life you're living. These hands, have they always been yours? This path you walk each day, when did you choose it? Or did it choose you while you were busy making other plans? There's a particular kind of loneliness in feeling strange to yourself. It's not the emptiness of an unvisited home or the ache of a phone that doesn't ring. It's standing in a crowded room of your own memories and realizing you don't recognize your own heartbeat anymore. Some call it midlife. Others name it awakening. I call it the soul's quiet revolution, when the woman you've been begins to question the woman you've become. Don't fear this questioning, dear one. The mirror asks what needs asking. The reflection shows what needs seeing. I spent years running from that stranger in the mirror. Kept myself busy with noise and movement and the caring for others. Filled every silence with sound so I wouldn't hear that whisper, "Who are you now?" But the question waits patiently. It knows no deadline. It sits beside your bed at night, walks with you to the kitchen in the morning, rides silently in the passenger seat of your car. When did your smile begin to feel like something you put on, rather than something that rises from within? When did your laughter start to sound like an echo of someone you used to know? These questions aren't accusation or judgment. They're invitations. The beginning of a conversation long overdue. There was a time I couldn't bear to be alone with myself. The silence felt too loud with all those unanswered questions. Perhaps you know this too, how we fill our days with endless tasks, our homes with objects, our calendars with commitments, anything to avoid that quiet moment when we might have to face the woman we've become. But here's what I've learned in all my years: the stranger in the mirror isn't your enemy. She's been waiting, so patiently waiting, for you to look her in the eyes and say, "I see you. I'm ready to know you again." Your reflection holds secrets you've forgotten, wisdom you've buried, dreams you set aside. Next time you catch yourself feeling like a visitor in your own skin, don't turn away. Pause, breathe, place your hand on your heart. Feel its faithful rhythm. This body has carried you through everything, even when you weren't fully present within it. The mirror's question isn't meant to haunt you. It's meant to guide you home. There's a space between your heartbeats. Have you felt it? That small, sacred pause where one moment ends before the next begins, where the woman you were takes a breath before becoming the woman you are. In these shadowlands between heartbeats, we sometimes lose ourselves. I remember sitting at my kitchen table one Tuesday afternoon, sunlight streaming across the wooden surface I'd wiped clean 1,000 times, my hand wrapped around a teacup, warm against my palm. Everything so ordinary, so familiar, and yet I felt as though I was watching someone else's hand, someone else's life unfolding before me. This feeling comes like weather, unexpected, unbidden. One moment you're fully present, and the next you're observing yourself from a distance, wondering when your life became this particular shape, when your voice adopted this particular tone, when your dreams shrunk to fit inside the rooms of expectations built around you. The shadows between heartbeats grow longer as we age. The pause stretches. In youth, we rush headlong from one moment to the next, never noticing the spaces in between. But now we feel them. Now we wonder about them. You've spent decades becoming who others needed you to be. Mother, daughter, wife, friend, colleague, caretaker. You've worn these titles like well-tailored clothes until the fabric of your identity has taken their shape, until sometimes you forget where they end and you begin. I spent years smiling when expected, speaking when spoken to, nodding in all the right places, moving through rooms like a ghost in my own story. Perhaps you've done this too, performed the choreography of your life so perfectly that you forgot to feel the dance in your bones. The strange thing about becoming a stranger to yourself is that no one else notices. You still answer to your name, still sign the same signature, still know which key opens your front door. The women at church still call you by name. The cashier at the market still recognizes your face. Only you feel the displacement, the subtle shift, as though you're standing slightly to the left of your own life. In these shadows between heartbeats, questions emerge like stars at twilight. Who might you have been if you'd turned left instead of right at that crossroads 20 years ago? What dreams did you set aside so carefully that you can't quite remember their shape anymore? What parts of yourself did you pack away, promising to return to them someday? Don't mistake these questions for regret, dear one. They aren't meant to haunt you with what might have been. They're lanterns, illuminating parts of yourself that have been waiting in darkness, patient, quiet, alive. I remember waking one morning and catching sight of my mother's hands at the end of my arms. When did that happen? When did my skin begin to tell stories I hadn't finished living? When did time leave its signature across my knuckles, around my eyes, along the soft curve of my neck? We become strangers to ourselves in these small recognitions. These quiet realizations that life has continued its steady march while we were busy looking elsewhere. The shadows between heartbeats hold truths we aren't always ready to hear. That's why we fill our days with noise, our homes with things, our minutes with distractions. Anything to avoid that moment when we must. Acknowledge the distance we've traveled from ourselves. But here's what I know to be true. Those shadows aren't empty. They're fertile ground, rich soil where new understanding can take root, where the woman you've been and the woman you're becoming might finally meet, might finally speak to one another across that divide. Next time you feel yourself drifting away, becoming observer rather than participant in your own story, don't fight it. Don't rush to fill the space with noise or activity. Sit with it. Listen. The shadows between heartbeats have something important to tell you. They're reminding you that it's never too late to become reacquainted with yourself. There was a time when you spoke fluently in dreams and possibilities, when your inner voice was clear as morning light, unfiltered by doubt or expectation. Do you remember? How freely your thoughts once flowed, how naturally your desires made themselves known. Somewhere along the way, we forget this native tongue, this intimate language of the self. We learn instead to speak in should and must, and what will they think? Until our authentic voice becomes like a childhood dialect, half-remembered, spoken haltingly, with an accent that betrays how long we've been away from home. I was 43 when I realized I could no longer answer a simple question. What do you want? Not what my children needed, not what my partner expected, not what my position required. What did I, this woman, this soul, this being truly want? The silence that followed frightened me. It echoed like footsteps in an empty hallway. How had I become so fluent in everyone else's needs while forgetting the vocabulary of my own? Perhaps you've experienced this too. That moment when someone asks what you'd like for dinner, or where you'd like to go on vacation, or what would make you happy, and you find yourself searching for words that once came naturally. As though the dictionary of your desires has been misplaced on a shelf too high to reach. This forgetting doesn't happen in a day. It's gradual, like a language not practiced. First, you lose the nuanced words, the subtle expressions of your deepest wishes. Then, the everyday phrases that articulate simple joys and preferences. Finally, even the basic grammar of your authentic self begins to fade, until you're speaking entirely in borrowed phrases. You become fluent, instead, in compromise, in peacekeeping, in making yourself small enough to fit within the margins of others' expectations. You master the art of anticipating needs before they're spoken, of reading rooms before anyone else has even entered them. And all the while, that first language, your soul's mother tongue, grows fainter, more distant, like a song heard from another room. I remember standing in a department store, staring at a rack of clothing, completely paralyzed by the simple act of choosing something for myself. Which colors spoke to me? Which textures felt right against my skin? I couldn't say. I'd spent so long considering what was appropriate, practical, acceptable, I'd forgotten how to hear what my own senses were whispering. The stranger we become to ourselves speaks a different dialect than the woman we were born to be. She uses words like reasonable and sensible and appropriate. She asks permission before speaking, apologizes for taking up space, questions her own knowing. Rediscovering your native tongue begins with silence, with listening for the faint echo of that original voice beneath the noise of daily living. It starts with simple questions asked in quiet moments. Not the grand existential ones, those come later. Begin with, what tastes bring you pleasure? What sounds soothe your spirit? What textures comfort your skin? Your body remembers this language even when your mind has forgotten. Your senses have preserved the vocabulary of your authentic self, waiting for you to reclaim it. I spent years in this gentle reclamation, learning again to trust the wisdom of my own knowing, practicing the forgotten art of stating a preference without apology, of making a choice because it resonated with something deep within, not because it pleased someone else or met an external standard. It felt strange at first, awkward, like limbs that have fallen asleep beginning to wake. This remembering comes with sensations both uncomfortable and exhilarating. The pins and needles of a self too long held still, now stirring back to life. There is grief in this awakening too, sorrow for the years spent speaking in borrowed tongues, for the choices made in languages not your own. Honor this grief when it arises. It testifies to what was lost, but also to what remains, waiting to be reclaimed. Your authentic voice didn't disappear, it simply went underground, like a river finding its way beneath the surface when the landscape above became inhospitable. It has been flowing all this time, carrying the words you'll need when you're ready to speak as yourself again. Begin today with one small truth, one genuine preference, one desire expressed in your own words. This is how we find our way back to fluency, one honest syllable at a time. In a world that fears quiet, silence becomes a revolutionary act, a rebellion against the constant noise that keeps us from hearing our own thoughts, from feeling the contours of our own hearts. I've come to think of silence as a garden, a protected space where the seeds of self-knowledge can take root, where the fragile shoots of forgotten dreams can push through soil undisturbed, where the weeds of others' expectations can be gently, lovingly removed. When did you last sit in true silence? Not the hurried pause between tasks or the exhausted collapse at day's end, but intentional quiet, spacious stillness, the kind that feels at first like an empty room and then, gradually, reveals itself to be fully furnished with your own thoughts, feelings, and intuitions. We become strangers to ourselves in noise and motion, in the endless distractions of screens and schedules, in the comforting numbness of always being busy, always being needed, always moving too quickly to notice the growing distance between who we are and who we've become. I remember the first time I truly sat with myself after years of running, how terrifying that silence felt, how loud with questions I'd been avoiding, how crowded with feelings I'd set aside for later, a later that never seemed to arrive. Perhaps you know this fear, this resistance to being alone with yourself. The way your hand reaches for the remote, the phone, the book, anything to fill the space that might otherwise be filled with your own company. We've been taught that productivity matters more than presence. That worth is measured in output, in tasks completed, in visible results. No wonder silence feels like failure, like wasted time, like dangerous territory where uncomfortable truths might find voice. But it is precisely in this garden of silence that we begin to recognize ourselves again, where the stranger in the mirror becomes more familiar with each quiet moment spent in her presence. I started small. 5 minutes each morning before the house awoke. Just sitting, breathing, being, no agenda, no purpose beyond witnessing whatever arose. Some days, nothing but restlessness. Other days, tears for no apparent reason. Occasionally, unexpected joy, the kind that bubbles up from a hidden spring, long covered by the debris of busy days. Over time, these moments of silence became sacred to me, necessary as food or water. I began to protect them fiercely, to create boundaries around them, to honor them as the foundation of everything else in my life. Because how can we hear our own voice if we never stop talking? How can we know our own mind if it's constantly filled with others' thoughts? How can we feel our own heartbeat if we never place a hand upon our chest and simply listen? In the garden of silence, you'll encounter parts of yourself long forgotten, dreams you tucked away because they seemed impractical, desires you denied because they didn't fit the life you'd built, wounds you covered because there never seemed to be time for their healing. Be gentle with what you find there. These neglected aspects of yourself aren't asking for immediate action or dramatic change. They're simply asking to be acknowledged, to be welcomed back into the wholeness of who you are. The woman who feels like a stranger, she's been waiting in this garden, tending these hidden parts of you, preserving what matters most until you found your way back. Silence isn't empty. It's full of answers to questions you forgot to ask. I know it isn't easy to create this space in a world that values constant connection, constant productivity. I know there are demands on your time, responsibilities that cannot be set aside, children who need feeding, work that needs completing, relationships that need tending. Start where you are, with what you have. 2 minutes in your parked car before entering the house. 3 minutes in the bathroom with the door locked. 5 minutes before sleep claims you. Small moments of silence, claimed like rare jewels from the rush of everyday life. These moments will begin to speak to you, to reveal the map back to yourself, to translate the foreign language you've become into something recognizable again. In the garden of silence, strange becomes familiar, distant becomes intimate. The woman you've been and the woman you are begin to recognize each other across the divide of busy years. Tend this garden faithfully, and you'll never again feel like a stranger in your own life. There are words we swallow instead of speak, truths we bury rather than voice, feelings we crush beneath the weight of "I'm fine" and "don't worry about me," and "it doesn't matter." Year after year, these unspoken words accumulate within us, stones in the stomach, thorns in the throat, shadows in the heart. Is it any wonder we eventually become strangers to ourselves when so much of who we are remains unsaid? I carried the weight of unspoken words for decades. The no that became yes to keep peace. The I'm hurt that became I'm fine to avoid conflict. The I need that never left my lips because I was taught that needing was selfish, that wanting was greedy, that asking was demanding. Perhaps you know this weight, this heaviness that comes from being the keeper of your own silence, the guardian of truths too dangerous or inconvenient to release into the open air. We learn this silence young, don't we? Watching our mothers swallow their pain, observing how women who speak too loudly, feel too deeply, want too much, are labeled difficult, needy, too emotional. We learn to edit ourselves before we've even finished a thought, to question our perceptions before we fully experience them. I remember sitting in meetings where my ideas were ignored until a man repeated them, hosting dinners where my needs came last, raising children while slowly erasing myself from the family portrait. All the while, words gathered in my throat like unshed tears. See me, hear me, I am still here. But here is the terrible alchemy of unspoken words. They don't disappear when left unsaid. They transform. Anger becomes resentment. Hurt becomes bitterness. Desire becomes despair. Need becomes emptiness. And eventually, the weight of all these transformed feelings creates a woman you no longer recognize. A stranger whose eyes look back at you from the mirror, whose silence has become her defining feature. I was 52 when I finally began to speak my truth. Not all at once, I wasn't that brave, but in small moments, with trembling voice. No, that doesn't work for me. I feel hurt when this happens. I need time for myself. Simple sentences that felt like mountains in my mouth. The earth didn't shatter, relationships didn't instantly crumble, though some did change, and a few did end. But with each truth spoken, I felt something shift inside me. A lightening, a reclamation, a reunion with parts of myself long silenced. Your unspoken words have weight. They take up space inside you, crowding out joy, creativity, spontaneity, peace. They require energy to contain energy that might otherwise be spent on living fully, loving openly, creating freely. Begin to set them free, not in a torrent of long-suppressed emotion, not in ways designed to wound others or settle scores, but thoughtfully, intentionally, with care for both yourself and those who will hear you. Start with yourself. Speak your truth in journals, in prayers, in the privacy of your own company. Name the feelings that have gone unnamed. Acknowledge the needs that have gone unmet. Validate the perceptions that others have denied. Then, when you're ready, begin to speak these truths to others, to those who have earned the right to hear them, to those who have shown themselves capable of listening without judgment, of holding space without attempting to fix or change what you feel. There is power in naming, in saying, "This is what happened, this is how it affected me, this is what I need now." There is healing in giving voice to what has lived too long in silence. I'm not promising it will be easy. Finding words for long unspoken truths rarely is. You may stumble, you may speak too harshly at times, or too apologetically at others. You are learning a new language, after all, the language of your own authentic voice. But with each word released, with each truth expressed, the stranger in the mirror becomes more familiar. The distance between who you've pretended to be and who you truly are begins to close. The weight you've carried for so long begins to lift. And in that lightness, you might rediscover something long forgotten. The sound of your own laughter, the feeling of your own joy, the contours of your own desires, the shape of your own dreams. The woman you've been and the woman you are begin to speak to one another, to recognize each other, to become one again. Release the weight of unspoken words, and you release yourself from the prison of your own silence. Before you were anyone else's, you were your own. Before mother, daughter, wife, colleague, friend, you were simply yourself, a woman with a name that belonged to her alone. Do you remember her? That woman who existed before all the roles and responsibilities, before the world taught her who she should be, what she should want, how she should move through spaces not designed with her in mind. I lost track of her somewhere between my 20s and 40s, between saying I do and raising children and building career, between trying to be all things to all people and forgetting that I was, first and always, someone unto myself. Perhaps you've lost track of her too. Perhaps she feels like a character, from a half-remembered novel, familiar yet distant, real yet somehow fictional. Someone you knew intimately once, but now can only recall in fragments, in glimpses, in moments when something stirs her from slumber. A song on the radio that makes your body move before your mind can object. A book that keeps you up until dawn, lost in worlds you'd forgotten you loved to explore. A conversation that ignites passion you didn't know you still possessed. These are echoes of her voice, reminders that she still exists beneath the layers of identity you've accumulated over the years. I was arranging flowers one afternoon, nothing special, just grocery store blooms in a simple vase, when I caught myself humming, moving with a rhythm that came from somewhere deep inside, choosing colors that pleased no one but me. And in that ordinary moment, I remembered, this is who I was before. Someone who found joy in simple beauty. Someone who moved to music only she could hear. Someone whose choices were guided by inner knowing rather than external approval. Remembering her name isn't about rejecting who you've become. It's not about discarding the identities that also bring meaning and connection to your life. It's about recognition, about acknowledging that beneath the mother, the partner, the professional, the friend, there exists a singular soul with her own preferences, passions, and purpose. This remembering can feel like archaeology, carefully brushing away years of accumulated dust to reveal something precious buried beneath, something that has been waiting intact for you to discover it again. Where to begin this excavation? With curiosity rather than judgment, with questions rather than conclusions. What made you laugh before you learned to please? What fascinated you before you learned to be practical? What did you create before you learned to be perfect? What did you love before you learned to be appropriate? I found my way back through old photographs, through journals yellowed with age, through conversations with those who knew me when I was most authentically myself, before I learned to shape myself to others' expectations. But the most powerful remembering came in stillness, in allowing myself to be without doing, in creating space for her voice to rise above the noise of daily demands and obligations. She speaks in whispers at first, tentative, uncertain if you're truly listening this time. Be patient with her. Show her that you're ready to hear what she has to say, even when it contradicts everything you've been taught to believe about who you should be. Remember, you weren't born knowing how to doubt yourself. You weren't born apologizing for your existence, qualifying your statements, making yourself small enough to fit into spaces designed for someone else's comfort. These were learned behaviors, which means they can be unlearned. The stranger in the mirror becomes less strange when you recognize her eyes as the same ones that looked out at the world with wonder before life taught you fear. When you see her hands as the same ones that reached for what they wanted before shame taught them hesitation. When you hear her voice as the one that spoke truth before the world taught it compromise. I spent years reintroducing myself to myself, learning again what brought me joy, what stirred my passion, what filled me with purpose. It wasn't always comfortable, this remembering. Sometimes it brought grief for time lost, for dreams deferred, for a self too long denied. Honor that grief if it arises. It testifies to what matters, to what was valuable enough to mourn its absence. But don't remain there. The purpose of remembering isn't to regret the past, but to reclaim the present. Your name, your true name, the one that belongs to you alone, is still written on your soul. It hasn't been erased by all the other names you've answered to over the years. It waits for you to remember it, to speak it, to answer when it calls. And when you do, when you look in the mirror and finally recognize the woman looking back, the feeling isn't just familiarity, it's homecoming. We are more than what shows above ground. Like trees, our visible lives, our actions, roles, and relationships are sustained by an invisible network of roots, beliefs, values, desires, fears, dreams. These hidden systems shape everything about us, though we rarely pause to examine them. Becoming a stranger to yourself happens when you lose touch with these roots. When you can no longer trace the connection between what you do and why you do it. When your choices feel automatic rather than intentional. When your life feels like something that's happening to you rather than through you. I remember the day I realized I was living from someone else's root system, making decisions based on values I'd inherited but never questioned, pursuing goals that reflected others' definitions of success, avoiding paths that reflected others' definitions of failure. I was growing someone else's life, not my own. Perhaps you felt this too, this subtle wrongness, this sense that your visible life doesn't match your inner landscape, that the fruits you're bearing don't taste quite right because they're growing from roots that aren't truly yours. The journey back to yourself begins underground, with gentle, curious exploration of what lies beneath the surface of your daily life, with questions that may feel uncomfortable at first, that may have no immediate answers, but that will lead you back to your own authentic foundation. What do you believe about yourself that you've never questioned? What do you value that you were taught to value? What do you desire that is truly your desire, not something planted in you by family, culture, or society? These aren't questions with simple answers. They require patience, honesty, and compassion for the self that has been doing its best with the root system it inherited. I began this underground journey with one question: what would I do differently if I didn't care what anyone thought? The answers surprised me. Some were small. I'd wear different clothes, decorate my home differently, spend my leisure time in ways that raised eyebrows. Some were larger. I'd change careers, speak more directly, set boundaries that might disappoint others. The gap between these answers and my actual life revealed how much of my root system had been shaped by external expectations rather than internal truth. Your roots run deep. They've been growing for decades, intertwining with beliefs absorbed from parents, teachers, partners, cultures, religions. Some of these borrowed beliefs may serve you well. Others may be strangling your authentic self, preventing it from receiving the nourishment it needs to thrive. Examining these roots isn't about rejecting everything that came before. It's about conscious choice, about deciding which inherited values align with your true self and which do not, about determining which beliefs support your growth and which constrain it. This exploration happens in quiet moments of reflection, in asking why when you feel resistance or obligation, in noticing when your yes feels heavy and your no feels guilty, in questioning the shoulds and musts that drive your decisions. It happens when you dare to imagine a life aligned with your own values rather than values imposed upon you, when you give yourself permission to want what you truly want, not what you've been told you should want. I spent months in this underground territory. Sometimes the work was painful, uprooting beliefs that had structured my entire life, examining fears that had dictated my choices, confronting the ways I'd abandoned myself to please others. Sometimes it was liberating, discovering desires I'd denied, reclaiming dreams I'd dismissed, remembering a self I'd forgotten. The stranger in the mirror becomes less strange when you understand the root system feeding her life. When you can trace the connection between what grows above ground and what lies beneath. When you can say, yes, I see now why I've made these choices, lived this way, become this person. And here is the beautiful truth. Roots can be nurtured in new directions. Old beliefs can be gently removed. New values can be planted. Your internal landscape can be tended with the same care you've given to external roles and responsibilities. This tending begins with awareness, with noticing what feeds you and what depletes you, what brings you alive and what diminishes your vitality, what feels like truth in your bones and what feels like someone else's script you're reciting. Then comes choice, intentional decisions about what to keep, what to release, what to cultivate. This isn't about dramatic overnight transformation. It's about steady, consistent redirection of your energy toward what truly matters to you. And finally comes alignment, the gradual process of bringing your visible life into harmony with your authentic root system, of making choices that reflect your true values, pursuing goals that spring from genuine desire, creating relationships that honor your actual needs. When your life above ground connects to roots that are genuinely yours, you no longer feel like a stranger to yourself. The woman in the mirror looks familiar again, not because she's unchanged, but because she's authentically evolving from her own deep truth. This is how we find our way home. Not by returning to who we were before life shaped us, but by becoming who we were always meant to be, a self rooted in authentic values, growing toward its own unique light. There comes a moment in this journey back to yourself when something shifts, when the woman in the mirror no longer feels like a complete stranger, when you catch glimpses of familiarity in her eyes, hear notes of authenticity in her voice, recognize something essential in her presence. This recognition doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in moments fleeting at first, then more sustained. Like dancers circling each other, you and your authentic self begin a cautious approach, a gradual remembering, a tentative reunion. I felt it first while walking alone on an autumn morning. Something in the quality of light, the scent of fallen leaves, the rhythm of my own footsteps triggered a visceral memory. This is how it feels to be me. Not the role I play, not the person others see, but me, the essential self beneath all the layers of adaptation and accommodation. For just a moment, the distance collapsed. The stranger in the mirror and the woman I remembered being became one. Then the moment passed, the separation returned, but something had changed. I'd remembered the possibility of wholeness. Perhaps you've experienced these moments too. When something bypasses your carefully constructed identity and speaks directly to your core, when you respond from a place so authentic it surprises you. When you think, yes, this is who I am beneath everything else. These moments of recognition are invitations to the dance, to the delicate, deliberate process of becoming reacquainted with yourself. This dance begins with attention, with noticing when you feel most at home in your own skin. Is it when you're creating something with your hands? When you're moving your body freely? When you're speaking truth without filtering? When you're alone in nature? When you're connecting deeply with another soul? These moments of alignment aren't random. They're signposts pointing toward your authentic self. They're showing you the conditions under which the stranger becomes familiar, the separation dissolves, the wholeness returns. I began collecting these moments like precious stones, writing them down, studying their common elements, looking for patterns that might lead me back to myself more consistently. What I discovered surprised me. My authentic self emerged most clearly not when I was striving to find her, but when I was fully present, whatever I was doing. When I stopped thinking about who I should be and simply allowed myself to be. The dance of recognition isn't about searching for a fixed, unchanging self hidden beneath layers of social conditioning. It's about creating conditions where your authentic nature can express itself freely in each present moment. Sometimes this means removing obstacles, the need for approval, the habit of self-criticism, the fear of disappointing others. Sometimes it means creating space, quiet moments without distraction, creative activities without agenda, conversations without pretense, but always it means presence. The willingness to be here now, to feel what you're feeling, to think what you're thinking, to want what you're wanting without judgment or resistance. I practiced this presence in small ways at first. While drinking my morning coffee, really tasting it, really feeling the warmth of the cup in my hands. While listening to music, allowing it to move through me without analyzing or critiquing. While talking with a friend, being fully there, not half elsewhere in my thoughts. And in these moments of presence, I began to recognize myself again. Not as I was 20 years ago, that woman is gone, transformed by experience and time. Not as someone new and unfamiliar, though parts of me had been buried, they hadn't disappeared, but as the continuous thread of being that had been present all along, beneath all the changes, roles, and adaptations. The stranger in the mirror becomes less strange when you stop trying to force recognition and instead create conditions where recognition can naturally occur. When you release the grip of should and must and supposed to, long enough to feel what is actually true for you in this moment, this dance takes patience. The music of authentic being doesn't play on command. It emerges in its own time, in its own way. Your role isn't to control the process, but to remain open to it, to keep showing up for the dance, even when the steps feel uncertain. There will be days when the stranger seems more strange than familiar, when the distance between who you've been and who you truly are feels insurmountable. This is part of the dance too, the natural ebb and flow of recognition. On these days, be gentle with yourself. Remember that reconnection isn't a destination, but a continuing journey. That each moment of recognition, however brief, is a triumph of authenticity in a world that often rewards conformity. And know this, with each step of this dance, with each moment of genuine presence, with each act of courageous authenticity, the woman you are and the woman you've been move closer together. The music grows clearer, the steps become more natural, until one day you look in the mirror and there's no stranger looking back at all. Only you, in all your complex, contradictory, magnificent wholeness, home at last in your own being. We are not meant to be divided selves, past separate from present, inner life, disconnected from outer expression, essence estranged from existence. We are meant to be whole, integrated beings where memory and moment intertwine like threads in a beautiful tapestry. Becoming a stranger to yourself happens in this division, when the woman you were and the woman you are exist in separate compartments of your consciousness, when your history feels irrelevant to your present, when your outer life no longer reflects your inner truth. Healing this division requires a delicate weaving, a conscious bringing together of then and now, inside and outside, essence and expression. Not to create a perfect, seamless whole life is too complex for such simplicity, but to create a meaningful pattern where each thread contributes to the beauty of the whole. I began this weaving in my 50s, when the gap between who I'd been and who I'd become felt too wide to bridge. When looking at old photographs felt like glimpsing a woman I barely knew. When telling stories from my youth felt like speaking of someone else's life. Perhaps you've felt this disconnect too. This sense that your life has happened in chapters so distinct they could belong to different books entirely. This struggle to reconcile the passionate girl you were with, the practical woman you've become. The dreamer with the realist, the rebel with the peacemaker. This reconciliation begins with recognition that all of these aspects are genuinely yours, that you contain multitudes, that the apparent contradictions in your nature aren't flaws to be resolved, but dimensions to be embraced. The young woman who painted until dawn, and the mature woman who makes practical decisions, the girl who danced with abandon and the adult who moves with caution, the dreamer and the realist, the lover and the solitary soul. All of these exist within you still, waiting to be acknowledged, honored, integrated. I started carrying a small notebook, jotting down memories as they surfaced, not just the significant milestones, but the quiet moments that shaped me. The time I stood up to a bully in 3rd grade, the afternoon I spent reading poetry by a lake instead of attending class, the night I drove for hours just to see the ocean at sunrise. These weren't just nostalgic reminiscences. They were pieces of myself I'd left behind. Qualities I'd abandoned, passions I'd forgotten. By reclaiming these memories, I began reclaiming the fullness of who I am. Your memories hold similar treasures, not to be dwelled in with longing for what was, but to be mined for what remains true, what still resonates, what might still find expression in your present life. The weaving continues with curiosity about how these past aspects might find voice in your current circumstances. Not through dramatic reinvention or impractical return to former ways, but through subtle integration, through honoring the essence rather than recreating the form. Perhaps the girl who painted until dawn now expresses her creativity in the way she arranges flowers or prepares food or solves problems at work. Perhaps the rebel who challenged authority now channels that courage into standing up for others or speaking uncomfortable truths. Perhaps the dreamer now envisions possibilities others miss. The essence remains, though its expression evolves. The core qualities that make you uniquely you have not disappeared, they've simply gone underground, waiting for conditions that allow them to emerge in new, mature forms. I found my teenage passion for justice expressing itself in quiet advocacy for those without voice. My childhood love of stories channeling into deep listening to others' experiences. My youthful spiritual seeking manifesting in a more grounded, embodied practice of presence. These weren't returns to who I'd been. Time and experience had changed me irreversibly. They were integrations of what had always been essential to my nature, with who I'd become through living. The stranger in the mirror becomes less strange when you recognize in her face the echoes of all the women you've been. When you see how your history lives in your present. When you understand that growth doesn't mean abandoning your past, but incorporating its wisdom into your continuing evolution. This weaving happens through intentional acts of integration, through asking what remains true from earlier chapters of your life, through considering how forgotten passions might find new expression, through honoring qualities you've dismissed as childish or impractical or irrelevant. It happens through storytelling to yourself and trusted others about the full arc of your journey. Not just the presentable narrative of achievement and growth, but the messy, contradictory, non-linear path that has made you who you are. The failures as well as successes, the wrong turns as well as right ones, the losses as well as gains, and perhaps most importantly, it happens through compassion for all the women you've been, for the young girl navigating a world not designed for her wholeness, for the young woman making choices with limited information and resources, for the mother sacrificing parts of herself for those she loves, for the professional conforming to succeed in systems resistant to authentic femininity. Each version of you did the best she could with what she knew at the time. Each deserves understanding rather than judgment, appreciation rather than criticism. When you extend this compassion to all the chapters of your story, the division begins to heal. The separate threads of memory and present moment begin to intertwine. The pattern of your life reveals its coherence, even in its complexity. And the woman in the mirror? She no longer appears as stranger, but as the current embodiment of a continuing story. A story still being written, still unfolding, still weaving past with present to create a future rich with possibility. There is a homecoming that happens not in places, but in presence. Not in returning to who you were, but in recognizing who you've always been beneath the layers of change. Not in finding something lost, but in realizing it was never truly gone, only temporarily obscured by the mist of forgetting. This is the final wisdom in our journey from strangeness back to recognition. The self you seek has been with you all along. I remember the morning this truth dawned on me. Nothing dramatic preceded it, no crisis, no epiphany, no thunderbolt of insight. Just ordinary sunshine spilling across an ordinary kitchen table where I sat alone with my thoughts. And suddenly, the question that had haunted me for years, who am I now, transformed into a different understanding altogether. I hadn't lost myself. I hadn't become someone else. I had simply stopped paying attention to the continuous thread of being that had been present through all the changes, all the roles, all the adaptations my life had required. Perhaps you've glimpsed this truth too, in quiet moments when the noise of doing subsides enough for the reality of being to emerge. When you sense, however fleetingly, that beneath all your becoming remains a core of isness that has never changed, never disappeared, never truly been lost to you. This core isn't a fixed identity or a rigid self-concept. It isn't a collection of traits or preferences or even values, though all of these may flow from it. It's more like a quality of awareness, a particular way of being present that is uniquely, unmistakably yours. Coming home to yourself means recognizing this core presence that has been with you from your first conscious moment, that has witnessed all you've experienced without itself being changed by those experiences, that knows you more intimately than anyone else ever could because it has never left you, never judged you, never forgotten who you truly are. I spent decades looking for myself in external markers, roles I played, achievements I collected, relationships I formed. Looking for myself in the reflection others held up to me, in the approval or disapproval I received, in the ever-shifting landscape of cultural expectations. No wonder I felt like a stranger to myself. I was looking everywhere but where I actually resided, in the quiet center of my own awareness, in the I that observes rather than the me that is observed, in being rather than doing or having or seeming. Coming home begins with a simple yet profound shift in attention from the content of your experience to the awareness experiencing that content. From the thoughts you think to the consciousness thinking those thoughts. From the feelings you feel to the presence feeling those feelings. From the roles you play to the being playing those roles. This shift doesn't require special circumstances or extended retreats or dramatic life changes, though sometimes these may support the process. It requires only the willingness to pause, to notice, to remember what has never been forgotten except by your conscious mind. I practice this remembering in ordinary moments. While washing dishes, feeling the water on my hands, hearing the quiet clink of plates, noticing the thoughts passing through my mind, and recognizing that something in me remained unchanged through it all. While sitting in traffic, observing frustration arise, watching how my body tensed in response, and realizing that beneath these changing phenomena was an unchanging witness. Gradually, the stranger in the mirror became familiar again. Not because my external life dramatically transformed, though certainly some changes naturally flowed from this remembering. Not because I somehow recaptured my youth or recovered lost aspects of my personality, though greater authenticity did emerge. She became familiar because I recognized that the essence of who I am has never been in the reflection at all. It has been in the awareness looking at the reflection, in the presence that has witnessed every moment of my existence without itself being altered by what it witnessed. This doesn't mean the journey has no purpose. The forgetting serves the remembering. The estrangement serves the homecoming. The sense of being a stranger to yourself serves the profound recognition that can only come after separation, the recognition that you are and have always been exactly where and who you need to be. The dance continues, of course. The weaving of past and present never ends. The integration of essence and expression remains a daily practice. There will still be moments when the fog rolls in, when familiar becomes strange again, when presence gives way to forgetting. But now you know the way home. Now you recognize the landmarks. Now you understand that home isn't a destination you reach once and for all, but a remembering you practice again and again until remembering becomes your natural state. The woman who felt like a stranger to herself? She was never truly other than you. The sense of separation was itself an experience arising within the wholeness of who you are. The journey back to yourself was never about distance traveled, but attention returned to what was never lost. You are, and have always been, the awareness in which all your experiences, all your roles, all your changes, all your forgetting and remembering arise. This is your true home. This is your authentic self. This is the continuous thread that makes sense of all the apparent contradictions and divisions in your story. When you know yourself as this awareness, the mirror no longer shows a stranger. It simply reflects the current expression of an eternal presence, the current chapter in an ongoing story, the current manifestation of a mystery that can never be fully captured in form, but that lives as the essence of who you truly are. Welcome home, beloved. Welcome home to yourself. There is no end to this journey, only deeper recognition. No final destination, only continuing revelation. No perfect resolution, only growing peace with the mystery of your own becoming. Rest here, in this moment of homecoming, in this quiet recognition of your own presence, in this gentle understanding that you were never truly lost, only momentarily forgetful of your own infinite nature. The path continues, the story unfolds, the weaving of essence and existence never ends. But now you walk with the knowing that has always lived in your bones, in your breath, in your being. You are home. You have always been home. And in this recognition, the stranger vanishes, leaving only the wonder of your own inexhaustible presence. It's not the end. It's just the moment when you allow yourself to rest in recognition. And recognition, too, is an act of love.